When viewers tuned into NBC Nightly News on November 9, 1989, they saw something that most of the world had believed impossible just hours earlier.
Good evening, live from the Berlin Wall on the most historic night in this wall's history. What you see behind me is a celebration of this new policy announced today by the East German government that now, for the first time since the wall was erected in 1961, people will be able to move through freely.
Jubilant East Germans danced on the wall, where they likely would have been shot just the day before. At border crossings, people eagerly streamed to the west, and all over the world, the end of the Cold War was suddenly in view. Until that night, the reality of the Berlin Wall had largely been one of concrete and barbed wire. It was built to divide the Western and Soviet zones of the city. For everyone involved, the wall felt permanent. Belinda Cooper lived in West Berlin at the time, but she often traveled to the east carrying information for dissidents.
It was kind of an Alice through the looking glass experience. It was like going into this other world that was sort of like West Berlin, but not quite. I mean, I think of East Berlin in the winter as like the paradigm East Bloc experience.
By 1989, the Cold War had raged for almost half a century. Some countries, like Poland and Hungary, were pushing for reform, but East Germany wasn't one of them. Its state security agency, the Stasi, were more pervasive than Moscow's notorious KGB. The country was ruled by hardliners who eyed capitalist West Germany with hostility and fear. Still, demonstrations demanding freedom of movement began in East Germany in the summer of 1989. On October 9th, tens of thousands of people, including Cooper, rallied in Leipzig.
People were telling me this could be Tiananmen. I mean, they could turn on us. They could start shooting us.
They were worried the authorities would use deadly force, just as the Chinese government had in Beijing's Tiananmen Square 4 months earlier. But the demonstrators in Leipzig circled the city peacefully. From then on, demonstrations became more common. In New York, NBC was watching the developments.
Did we think it would happen in 24 hours while we were there? No. We thought it would probably be something like the Czech Revolution, you know, the Velvet Revolution. It would take a couple of weeks and then they'd work it out. But to have the dramatic fall of the wall behind me was not something we anticipated.
The opening of the wall was not expected, not by the people in East Berlin, not by people in East European countries, not by the superpowers.
When Brokaw and his team got to Berlin, the East German political elite were readying a long press conference on new measures. They offered some freedom of movement, but were designed to sound good without doing much.
But the Politburo member, the unlucky Politburo member charged with announcing these, botched the announcement so badly that it sounded as if he had just opened the wall.
And we're droning on, and then suddenly he pulls out that piece of paper and reads that announcement that changed the course of history. Heinrich Walling said to me, he was our cameraman, I think he was our sound man at that point, the wall is coming down, or something to that effect. And his eyes were about that big because he lived with it forever.
East Germans were just as surprised, but they decided to test the announcement. They gathered at border crossings like the one at Bornholmer Street.
That's where a lot of dissidents lived. And so they, in large numbers, when they heard this Politburo announcement, decided to go to the checkpoints and say, let us pass. And the border guards were baffled. They had no instructions. And the border guards kept calling their superiors, and their superiors had no instructions for them either. And gradually the crowds grew larger and larger, and finally, on an ad hoc, uncoordinated basis, on an individual basis, the border guards decided to open the gates.
As people streamed through the borders, others simply climbed the wall. And then they started to dismantle it.
The wall, as we have known it since 1961, a sinister symbol of oppression, the wall has changed dramatically tonight.
It took almost a year for East and West Germany to reunite, but after November 9th, there was no going back.
The wall was symbolic of the whole Soviet satellite system. So it was not just Germany. You know, you stop and think about it, it was the Baltics, and it was Czechoslovakia and Poland and Hungary. They were all behind their own kind of wall. And when the real and symbolic wall came down, it was a flood tide, and it was over.
For 219 West, I'm Ben Brody.